Good morning, everybody. This is Mark Hadley from the Geneva Push, and I'd like to welcome you to the next Planter session, the online webinars provided by the Geneva Push. We'd like to thank you for attending, and especially for all the people who are getting up on the time difference. We've actually got a range of people from across Australia this morning, so thanks for attending. We hope you get a lot out of the topic today. We just want to let you know that the Planter sessions are something that we provide as a tight sort of half-hour experienced time with Australian church planners every month. So if you enjoyed this session, please tune into our further webinars. It'll be coming in the next couple of months. We also have a lot of emphasis on the practical in these sessions too. So we want to ensure that you go away with something you can implement today. And along the way, you'll have the opportunity today to submit questions to our guest, who happens to be Rick Smith. We'll meet him a little later. And it's just audio at present, so don't be worried if you're not seeing video or anything like that. At the moment, you'll just be seeing our Planter Sessions head page, and then we'll move through, and as you go through, there'll be various points as the PowerPoint progresses. Before I hand over, I just want to mention that the the company that actually makes this possible is EA Insurance, and we'd like to thank them. EA Insurance basically provides services for all organisations around Australia, but in particular they have packages for church planting organisations and church planters. So if you're yet to sort out the public liability side or building insurance or property insurance contents, it doesn't really matter. If you're still working through those issues, we'd encourage you to chat to EA Insurance. You can get all the details you need at ea.org.au. I think now is time to actually hand over to Mikey Lynch. Mikey Lynch is the director of the Geneva Push, one of our 4 directors, in fact. He's an AFES staff worker and an experienced church planter in his own right. Good morning, Mikey. Hello, we seem to have lost Mikey for a moment. Well, while we're waiting for Mikey, I'm personally going to move on and say hi to Rick Smith. And Rick Smith is our guest this morning. Oh, hey. Mikey's in. Mikey, I'll let you take over and you can tell everybody about Rick. Yes, we can now.
Can everyone hear me now? Yep, great. Yep. Excellent. It's good to have you along, Rick. So you started with Naremburn-Cammeray. Is that right? As a church about 12 years ago?
Yeah, 1998 we started our first plant from St Thomas's, North Sydney.
Yeah, and over that last 12 years, between 10 and 12 congregations.
Yeah, that's right. We've planted a congregation about 1 each year since then, and we've helped plant a couple of others outside of the immediate proximity by sending people as well.
Brilliant. So we've got the website there is ncachurch.com. I don't know if Mark can get that up on this little slide there, but ncachurch.com, and you can kind of stalk Rick there a bit while we go along the discussion here. During that time, you had a building program. You've planted some congregations, particularly connecting with Asian Australians. You're now in the running for local council elections or something like this. Would it be fair to say, a few years ago, Philip Jensen wrote an article where he said there were church planters who were like serial church planters, church founders who plant once and then stay put, and then church sponsors who actually play a role in seeding and supporting multiple churches. Would it be fair to say you're a church sponsor?
Individually or as a church, do you mean, Mikey?
Individually.
I think I'm a church planter. I think what happens is that as the leader continues to have a vision for the lost, he's never satisfied with the status quo. He's continuing to look out and realise there are so many more people that are not in church that need to be reached with the gospel. And that unease, that dissonance forces the planter to continue to seek out and take up other opportunities.
Yeah. In that process, one of the ways that you've seen church planting happen is through sponsoring and supporting others to do the fun bit.
Yeah, that's right. I'm continually looking for opportunities, but I'm continually looking for people that might be able to take up those opportunities, and then trying to shepherd them through the process of establishing a congregation. And so, that ends up being a sponsorship, partnership, oversight. I've created a team of people that work together, and when we work together, we're able to collectively do new work much more easily.
Fantastic. We got, Rick, a bunch of questions as people registered for this webinar, and so I thought rather than me run with the pre-prepared questions, I might just start with the ones we already have here, because they're great, and people can also type in their own questions on that little control panel as we go as well. But first from Mark, the question was not just with the team of people who are the lead planter, but as you start a new church plant or congregation, you need a whole bunch of roles. What are some of the kind of top of your shopping list in terms of mix of gifts and roles for that launch team?
Yeah, it'd be lovely to be able to be very selective in the people you put on a church plant team. That's not always the case. It's not always the reality. So primarily the person I'm looking for is the evangelist to lead a group of people in the sort of things that they need to be doing when they start. And that group of people can be made up of all sorts of discontents, people that are not happy where they are. There can be people that are transient, yet they're the people that are more inclined to be transient. People can have theological agendas, and they can just be motivated by, wanting to do something that's a bit of fun. So all of those things are pretty unseen. So your team is often a mixed bag when you start. That's the reality. The idea would be that you could be very discerning and make sure that you knew what everybody's gift was or wasn't. But the team leader needs to have an agenda which is primarily to reach the lost, to reach new people with the gospel, not to take people from other churches, but to actually be engaging the community with the gospel. They need to be able to think outwards and connect with people outwardly. Have I just lost you?
No. If you can still hear me, then I can still hear you. Yeah.
Right. So
to reflect off you there, one of the keys is that team leader, even if he gets discontents, one of the first things he's saying to them is, if you're going to come and join us, you need to join us in that mission.
He needs to be able to impart that mission vision. And then people need to willingly take on board that is going to be the agenda of the church and not seek to change it.
Yep. How do you know, Hans has asked, how do you know when it's the right time for that first plant? So you begin as back in 1998, and when's the right time to start the second thing, the evening service, the second congregation off-site? Are there some cues and triggers that help you know when it's time to do the next thing?
Yeah, even that is not that precise, Hans, I'm afraid. We've become aware of the opportunity first, and then we might have a small group of people that we think will connect with that opportunity. Now, regardless of the size, we will then get that group meeting and praying about how they can take up that opportunity. And some of the new congregations we've started have only started with 10 or a dozen people. They've started almost as a Bible study group that has been open and invitation. So we haven't looked for a critical mass. We haven't used that language. I know Ian Yeagelman from CCC Network, he actually says that you need about 100 or 120 people to start a new service. We haven't worked on that basis. We've just worked on a small group that is outwardly concerned, outwardly looking, and if we've got somebody to lead that group, we'll cut them loose and seek to provide for them from the network that we've got at NCA Church.
Just quickly, could you get a spelling for us on Yeagelman?
Is that a joke? He starts with a J. I think it's an AEGLMAN or something like that. He's from Lane Cove Christian City Church, and he's written a couple of books on church planting, or written one book that I know of. I can't remember what it is. Hello?
Oh, we seem to have dropped Mikey off then. He might be having a bit of a problem with his connection. So what I'm going to do is just move him on to another question that we're actually going to...
Serious question?
Oh, he's back again.
No, he's
it sounds like he might be having a bit of a problem. Rick, let me start you off on another question that we have in mind.
Yep.
And that is, when you're actually putting a team together, why do you go looking for other people? Why not be the guy each time? I mean, that is a particular model that some people do. They start a church or a congregation, they run it, and then they hand it over and they move on. Why do you spread the load that way? Why particularly do you do it that way?
I think as we've grown, the capacity for us to do new work depends on the resourcing that we get from the other work that's already been done. And I'm usually connected into all of those congregations. And so I continue to lead them, and I continue to have a face that's before them, a presence. We keep seeking to cast the vision for the other congregations, as well as the new service. Because the other congregations need to celebrate in the new work. They need to make sure that they're not feeling like all the good things are happening somewhere else, that they are very much a part of the new work that we undertake, and that we celebrate that and participate in that. That's really important for our capacity to keep planting new congregations. So my ability to be over all of those congregations limits my capacity to give attention to the particular congregation that we're starting. So I need to find somebody that I can trust, that has a vision that is the same as our church's vision, which is to reach people with the gospel, and cut them loose, free them up, move obstacles, so that they can actually do the work that we want them to do, and that's get out and about with the gospel.
Well, I guess actually that raises a whole other issue, because part of the problem in doing that is ceding responsibility. How much responsibility do you hand over? I mean, it's one thing to talk about cutting somebody loose, but then some people want to have their hand held. Some people maybe want to run faster than you want them to run. How do you handle that supply of power, I guess, between the two different organisations?
All of that comes through communication. It's spending time with people and talking through the issues, expressing your concerns honestly, hearing their concerns honestly, working out some of the solutions together. I think that is really important. Time with one another actually leads to trust. I often say to our congregational leaders, people won't care how much you know until they know how much you care. I think that's the same with teams. As teams work together and care for one another, so they're actually able to work better in the one direction. So really, I think constant communication and helping them work through the issues that they need to work through really means that we can keep doing things together.
And do you build up teams particular to each sort of church plant, or do you have a floating team? Do some staff go across? Chris wants to know: do your staff work across different sites?
We have a couple of staff at the moment that are working across different sites. Our most recent plants are not staffed with a full-time person, especially. Their only portion of their work staffing load is covered by a person. And so, but that is very difficult. We were actually spending time last staff meeting saying this is not quite working because these plants are not getting the attention they need. The trouble that you have there is being able to resource a full-time person to allocate to that new work. And that's one of the battles we always face, of whether we can transition it from no one to a full-time person. That's often a really big jump. So a student and a part-time person is often a better intermediate stage that we try to work towards, but there comes a point where that just it doesn't seem to work any longer.
Well, speaking of one of the things that you actually have to juggle, we know for those people who don't understand, who might be joining the conversation, haven't met Rick before or had a chance to check out the site, you're in the Anglican system in New South Wales in the Sydney Diocese. How do you handle this multi-church finances? Does everybody have a separate budget? Do you run everything through your parish council? How does it work?
No, one of the visions we've always had, and those sorts of visions need to be continually re-articulated. You need to keep saying to people why we are structured the way we are, but we have one account, one budget that all of the congregations contribute to, and then the new work is resourced from that budget. And one of almost the axioms that we keep repeating is that we accomplish more together than we could in our parts. And so we need to keep trying to ensure that our congregations have that vision. I would say that it comes with drawbacks, because the bigger we have got, the less connected the individual in the pew or the individual in a congregation feels to the whole. And so we need each part to see the vision of being part of the bigger church as well. So each congregational pastor needs to be convinced that that's the best way to go. And that congregational pastor needs to keep using that axiom that we accomplish more together than we could in our parts in his congregation. And that's really important.
How do you guys manage the that interconnectedness? I can see how those congregations, those church plants, could become quite siloed. Do you share information across the two? Do other staff under the sort of the instruction to make sure they're mentioning what's going on over at Naremburn, what's going on over at Cammeray, or the various places that you've planted?
Yeah, they're really important instruments of that. That bring us together. We've just last weekend had a combined weekend away where all 10 congregations went. We couldn't fit everybody onto a one site, but we had 350 people go away. So that was a really valuable time where there was lots of sharing of what the character of each congregation was like, what the work of the congregation was. There was a time of celebration so that people could interact and mix in. We have prayer meetings that we have together. And we use a lot. We use a lot of audio visuals at the moment. So if there's a baptism down at Balmoral Beach, for instance, from the Japanese congregation, somebody will take lots of photos. That'll be worked into an audio visual, and the other congregations will get a chance to celebrate that. And those instruments continue to build the bridges between the congregations. The prayer, the celebrations, the communication continue to make different congregations feel part of something.
Right. Well, I've got some good news. We actually have an old friend back in the conversation with us now. So I'm going to bring Mikey back online. Theoretically, Mikey, you should be able to talk now.
I'll see how we go anyway.
Okay,
welcome, Mikey.
I'll bow back out. But actually, I think we're just moving to that point where we're going to talk about the whole Umbrella Man competition.
The Umbrella Man competition. That is, I think, just a question on playing a role of pulling together those congregations and the staff. You're holding the umbrella over everyone, but there's the risk that if there's a clash with some or a group of staff, how do you avoid that clash from, bringing down the umbrella?
Because I've been here the longest, I do feel like I've got a certain standing amongst the staff team. They say that as a congregation gets bigger and bigger, eventually the leader becomes a mythical figure. I don't like that terminology, but there's a sense in which as a leader is in the position of leadership for a lot longer period, they do have a certain standing which others recognise that they either need to appreciate or move away. So I don't want to diminish the importance of that tenure. I think long time in a role continues to give momentum and continues to give direction to work. I see myself as, I often talk about being the shepherd, and I shepherd the team, continuing to hold people accountable for the work that they do, clear job descriptions, lots of communication about what's happening, continuing to remind them of the necessity to connect with the community, be proclaiming the gospel, do evangelism. But I'm also a shepherd in another sense, in that there's lots of tedious stuff that needs to happen in church life that you don't want church planters tangled up in.
So you're the lightning rod for that tedious.
I see myself as the NFL shepherd in a different sense. So I'm shepherd in the pastoral sense, and shepherd in the NFL blocker sense, where I run before and knock obstacles out of the way so that planters can get on with doing the work that we want them to do.
Yep.
So they're the main things, really, Mikey.
Yeah. Yep.
Oh dear.
Okay.
Okay. Well, listen, this is actually perfect timing because we've just moved into the question phase now. Now, if you're sitting and watching the slides go by, you'll see that we're actually up to the point where you can send us your questions. And one of the first ones we have, if you just want to look over to your GoToWebinar control panel, you'll see that you have the opportunity to submit a question, and then we'll feed them through to Rick. And the first one is from Dan. Dan asks, you guys have a specialised situation with small congregations. In fact, you've specialised in small congregations. What are the advantages and disadvantages of grouping those small conversations together, Rick?
the specialised within congregations. I suppose we work on that homogenous unit principle of evangelism, which is that we try to find bridges into the community, often those subcultures, and we establish ministries around that opportunity, which is into that subculture. The most obvious one of those has been the Japanese ministry. We had a big Japanese community in the lower North Shore of Sydney, the biggest Japanese concentration of Japanese in Australia, really. But we weren't able to reach out into that community until we got a Japanese-speaking person, Graham and Kathy Smith, who came back from CMS in Japan. So that is the way that we sort of try to bridge into the community. The hope is that we can get the benefits of that in terms of outreach, but also at the same time have the benefits of working together so that we get that heterogeneity as well. We get that fellowship which reflects our diversity and yet all one in Christ Jesus. So we're trying to play both sides of that equation, the homogeneity and the heterogeneity, but ensure that we're being driven by mission and fellowship.
When you move on to something that's like a small congregation, you were talking about before that you don't feel like you need the larger critical mass, the 120 people, that sort of thing. But where would you set the boundary at viable? I mean, do you continue on? I mean, some ethnic groups that you could be talking about could be quite small. You could be looking at 20 people. How long before you say, look, this is really not a scale that we can operate at?
It depends on the resources that we've got at our disposal. So, for instance, we've got a lot of young families, so we were able to allocate a lot more young families to a new work that we just started up at East Willoughby. And so because we were able to allocate more young families to the work from the outset, we didn't need to resource it financially as much or give it a full-time person. That was different to the Japanese work. We actually didn't have people that we could send to be part of that work. And so we realised that we needed to allocate full-time finances to that work if we were hoping to get it going. So it depends on the opportunity and our capacity to allocate resources to that opportunity. If we're unable to allocate people resources to a new opportunity, then we often need to wait longer so that we can save up the financial resources and start that over a longer period of time. So it really depends. It's quite nuanced. It just depends on seeing the opportunity, thinking outside of the box about how you can take up that opportunity and start to put the pieces together. And sometimes that's quite complicated. It really is.
Okay, well, we've actually got a question from John that's kind of related to that. In terms of looking at the resources that you have, he wants to know in the Anglican system, often a church plant takes place when you find a new minister to follow that church plant. So I take it what he means by that is that you have a minister, so you start a new congregation, you get a new minister, you get a new congregation or assistant minister or something like that. Is that how you followed your staffing, or do you look for specialists in areas? Maybe he's looking at the idea of Graham.
I think the vision will precede the resources, very much so. So our Japanese congregation, I'll use that as an instance because it's often the most distinctive. We saw the opportunity for years and years and years. It was in our plan every year. It was something that the parish council talked about as something that was quite obvious in the area because there was a big Japanese school that met every Saturday within 45 metres of the church, made up of 600 children. So that was an obvious opportunity. We prayed about it, we planned for it, it was in people's minds. Now that vision then becomes part of the culture of your church. And so when you say, we think we can take up this opportunity because we have someone coming back who could do the missionary work into the subculture, people are ready, people are aware, people are prepared to support it and see it as something worth supporting. So the vision for the ministry needs to come before, you can't just come to people and say, I've got a person, we're going to do a new work. And we continue to do that now. So we realise that there's a great opportunity to reach out into the subcontinental population in this area, an opportunity that isn't being taken up by anyone else. And so we feel the burden of that opportunity. And I want my congregations to feel the burden of that opportunity. that we want to take up that opportunity at some point, and we need to think hard about how we're going to do that. So that vision for the work needs to come first, and it needs to become part of the culture of the church, so that they're looking to take up the opportunity. And when the opportunity comes about, you know, when you can take it up, they jump at it and do it gladly.
Well, I'm going to bring Mikey back into the conversation, who's been I think he's been laying his own cable between Tasmania and Victoria at this point in order to actually get back in. Mikey, you can hear us now, okay?
Yeah, that's sorry about this, everyone. It's never happened before. I think Dobby did it. So,
well, I'll hand back over to you. You've got a question from Mark, I think, Mikey.
Yeah, that's right. What's the distance we're talking about for you between these different sites, congregations, church plants?
The furthest one we've got is out at it's out at Marsfield Community Centre now, so that's probably about 20 minutes drive away. We started to reach out to Asian Australian community at Macquarie, so that's about 20 minutes drive. And then we've got we've got 4 centres. One's about 10 minutes drive, one's 20 minutes of drive. That's the furthest away from us.
Yep. I was going to ask a question. I'm not sure if we've covered this already to what degree and so on, but the process of working out the exact degree of independence between these different ones, are they all the same, or is there a certain intuitive call you make case by case on the degree of autonomy?
Yeah, one of the things that reduces capacity of your team is if you insist on a lot of overlap. The breadth of your team will be increased if you have your team members working side by side, far more so than if you have them overlapping with one another. So I'm happy to work really hard at making the right appointments, taking my time with that, trying to ensure that, it's better to have no one than the wrong one. And then when you appoint somebody, you trust them. And you give them a lot of autonomy. We give them a lot of autonomy. Within our theological framework and in the frame, within the rationale of our bigger church, and also there's the benefit of accountability in the team that I think is really worthwhile. Accountability to one another and support one another, because so many church planters do burn out. So we want to trust people. We want to support them so they do have a high degree of autonomy to do the work that they do.
And so we're about to finish up, so I'll just ask one follow-up question on that, which is, does that mean there's a limited amount of staff working across all those different congregations, that there's not lots of whatever shared preaching, or whatever it is? Is there a sort of a certain, each of those are quite distinct in terms of where the staff focuses their time?
Yeah, so we work on a smaller church model. Rather than people having independent portfolios that overlap, we have a congregational pastor. That congregational pastor will do the lion's load of preaching at their congregation and pastoring at their congregation. So they start off very much a generalist. So we have 10 staff, not all of those full-time, but we also have 10 congregations. So each one of those congregations will have a primary congregational pastor. Without much overlap.
Great. Now we're out of time, Rick. I'm sorry again about the technology there, but the bits I've heard have been superb, mate. So thank you very much.
Pleasure.
Yes, and our thanks too from the team over at the Geneva Push, and thanks very much for Mikey for actually putting up with whatever Telstra has done to you today. We'd also like to thank you for attending. Guys, it's been a great session, and thank you very much to those people who are posting their questions in. Sorry we won't be able to actually get to everything else, everyone else who was involved, but look, we'll try and get some of those questions over to Rick, and he'll be able to see if he can have a chance to jot down some email answers, and we'll publish them on the site later. So just to remind you, we actually have the opportunity for you to participate in these webinars every month. And in fact, this month is a little different because we actually have two on. So coming up on May 30 at 9:30, we have What the First 2 Years Will Cost You with Ray Galea and Al Stewart. In fact, I believe that Ray's wife will be joining as well to give the male-female perspective on the sort of cost associated, not simply with the financial cost or the social cost of setting something up from a church, but also the cost to the family, the cost to the relationship. So if you're contemplating church planning, or you're certainly in those early years and wondering if it's just you, it's really worth tuning in for that particular webinar on May 30. Also, I'd like to encourage you, if you're going to be in Sydney on June 12, really you should try and get into the city to have to participate in the 5 M's, the axis of a healthy church. This is not an electronic get-together. This is a face-to-face with Andrew Hurd, Toby Neal, and Dan Godden, and a bunch of others. We'll be going through the whys and hows of using the 5M structure. So if you've wondered what all the 5Ms are about and how they apply, and in fact how you can get them to apply, then this is a great opportunity to get together with Andrew, Neil, Toby and Dan and be able to sort of hear their expertise in this area and how they've physically put it together themselves, and the successes, failures, the trials, the stretch points. So well worth being there on June 12 in Sydney. You'll find more details for that on our website. Also, I'd like to thank one more time EA Insurance for making the whole thing possible. Somebody has to pay the bills, and we're particularly thankful that they see this as such a valuable ministry that they're willing to do so. And so they provide insurance particularly tailored for church planning organisations and for church plants. And if you're struggling through some of the insurance issues, again, we can't think of anything better than to send you over to ea.org.au. They'll definitely be able to help you through. You might even think that you're not aware of the problems that you should be confronting. Well, they'll be able to talk you through the general things that you should concern yourself with. Now, what's basically going to happen now is we're going to wrap up the webinar, but you'll receive a link that'll ask you to do a quick survey. It's 4 questions. Honestly, if you can't do it in under 5 minutes, I'm not sure what's going on, but we'd really value your answers, because these particular answers help us shape the webinar and make it more appropriate for you. Make sure you're getting the topics and the questions that you'd like to see answered. So if you wouldn't mind taking a moment to do that, we'd like to thank you again for participating. We'd also like to thank you for being a part of what is in fact becoming quite a successful venture for the Geneva Push. We hope that we'll be able to continue to serve you in the future. Thanks very much.